Welcome everyone to today's session on the science to startups, and this is part of our mini scientific series. Now, this is a pre-recorded session, so please bear that in mind. However, if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the comments box, as we'll all be live in there to answer any of your questions for you. Jen, Hardeep and Danny, welcome to today's session. How are you all today?
Hi, Becca.
Awesome. And Jen, before we dive into today's discussion, would you like to just give a quick overview of Scientific at the One Group?
Yep, we are the scientific division. We work predominantly in the Cambridge area, but also nationally and globally as well. Do a lot of work with startups, very, very young startups, going right through the whole timescale really, and then of course we work with a lot more established companies, right up to global organisations as well. So we're doing this really to add to our startup series, as you said, and looking forward to talking to Marcus today.
Awesome, thanks Jen. And of course, as mentioned, our expert guest today is Marcus. Marcus, how are you today?
Hi Becca, nice to see you. I'm doing well, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Well, without further ado, let's dive straight into today's topic. So Jen, over to you with your first question.
Excellent, thanks Becca, and obviously welcome Marcus Scott from Superdielectrics. I know Marcus, you're the finance director over there, based in Great Chesterford. So to everybody that hasn't heard of Superdielectrics before, tell us a bit about the company and the technology and the mission, how you got started, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much for having me on, Jen. As you know, you can see the sun streaming in through the window. We're based in the research park down near Duxford, down near Saffron Walden, just south of Cambridge. And it's the most incredible place. We feel very lucky to be here. Superdielectrics has developed something completely new. It is a safe, low-cost and recyclable energy storage technology. But probably the most important thing is why we've bothered to do that, because our mission is to build an affordable and sustainable global distributed energy system. That will mean that we can take full advantage of renewable energy and have a much, much higher percentage of renewable energy in the mix and take us away from fossil fuels. Now, we're very small, got 27 people, and that is a massive claim, but you've got to start somewhere, right? So HP started in a garage, Facebook started in a dorm room. You know, most companies that when they start, they are very small. And energy storage technologies come along very rarely. I mean, there are three kind of main ones: capacitors, lead acid batteries, and lithium ion batteries. Capacitors were developed back in 1750. The lead acid battery in 1850, and lithium ion batteries in the 1970s. So these things come along very, very rarely. And in order to be able to do this and make these advances, we needed a completely new technology. So we have got to overcome four barriers. I'm not going to talk about them all now, but the first two is that the energy has got to be abundant and it must be low cost. So solar energy, as we all know, I mean, I'm looking at it streaming in through the window, comes every day and renews itself every day. And every hour, the amount of energy that hits the Earth from the sun is roughly equivalent to the amount of energy that humankind uses in an entire year. So we have a massive abundance of solar energy, about 10,000 times what we need. That used to be expensive to generate energy, but over the last 15, 20 years, it's become much cheaper. And in 2020, the International Energy Agency announced that solar energy was now the cheapest form of energy that mankind or humankind had ever known. So it's both very, very abundant and extremely low cost. But the challenge is that without storage, it's largely useless. And maybe we can talk about that in a little bit later on. But that energy storage is the fundamental piece of it.
Excellent. So your role in the company, you are the FD, Marcus, and I know, coming from a finance background, you wouldn't naturally be somebody who could get your head around all this complex technical stuff. And I know before you have worked with a similar type of company in that kind of industry. I know you work for ITM Power. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you found having to get your head around all of this renewable energy kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working for about 23 years as a CFO for startups, various different startups. And even before that, I worked for a software company. So I've always been kind of involved in the technology industries. But you're right, I don't have that deep scientific background, despite having worked at ITM Power, which was a fuel cell and alternative energy company, still around, very successful company based now up in Sheffield and quoted on the AIM market. But in a way, I think it may help that I'm not technical, because you've got to turn all of this into something that everybody can understand. I mean, half of our company have got PhDs. I think there are 75% of all the employees are based in the labs and are highly technical. So we've got plenty of technology brains within the company, but it's really a very human story. And even a very human story about being fallible. One of our founders, Dr. Don Highgate, he was the person who first formulated the material that goes into these supercapacitors. When he did so, he thought he found these amazing properties, but he thought actually he'd made a mistake in his calculation. He put them on a shelf for 18 months and completely forgot about them. And it wasn't until they were given to somebody at the University of Bristol to test that they suddenly said, well, these got these most amazing properties. And he said, oh, well, I thought they might have. But so even those people with incredible knowledge and PhDs and, incredible inventors in technology and science, even there, it's a very human, very fallible story. And our CEO, who again is not from a science background at all, he trained as an accountant and then worked as a banker. He's been doing this for 25 years. 25 years ago, he set up a hydrogen fund because he thought that hydrogen was going to be the way that we would replace fossil fuels. And he set that up on his own kitchen table and set up an investment fund and ended up as the CEO of ITM Power. So although it's obviously important to understand some of the technology, it's really about turning it into a human story.
Yeah. So tell us, you've been involved with Superdielectrics for some time now, Marcus. So, and obviously being involved with startups before, as you say. So you'll know lots around the kind of teething problems that early stage startups come across. Gaining the funding, the patents, that kind of thing. Can you talk to us a bit about what those teething problems are and how you conquer those?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the F word there, funding. I mean, that is always the most difficult subject for any startup, because getting the money to do it, in order to do anything, people need to be paid, right? So if you're going to get people in a lab, you've got to pay their salaries, you've got to provide them with a lab. So funding is always going to be the biggest challenge. And for 7 years, the founders of Superdielectrics worked without any salaries. And every penny that they raised was put into a contract that they had with the University of Surrey. None of them got paid during that entire time. So
wow.
Funding is always the biggest challenge, and it comes in cycles. Currently, we're in an environment where it's incredibly difficult to raise money. There was a big boom during lockdown when a lot of companies, technology companies, life science companies got a huge amount of money, and we benefited from that as well. But since then, the cycle has completely gone down and it's gone through the doldrums. And with all of the issues that we've currently got, wars, debt, cost of living crisis, that kind of level of funding has really become very much more difficult to get. So I would say that's always going to be the most difficult thing for a startup. Second thing I think is probably building the team, and it's around building it, finding the people, keeping the team, getting them to the point where they're high performing. And that's incredibly difficult, because when I think about all of those people who've come into our business, and 50% of them PhDs, incredibly talented people. But when you're in a university, you often have a kind of high degree of structure. You have heavily supported work. You've got existing technology and techniques. You've got kind of relaxed deadlines. You've got 3-4 years to do a PhD. You then come into an environment in a startup, and it's totally
world.
It's like a low degree of structure. Sometimes it's completely unsupported work. You've got new technologies and techniques, and you've got these incredibly challenging deadlines. And that's very difficult to adjust to. And, often when you start as a graduate and then you go into a technology company, you've got time to adjust. But as a PhD coming into a startup in a technology that is brand new, you've got to adjust on day one. And that is a real challenge for many people. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenges that we've had: funding, building, maintaining, and just getting people along that curve and making sure they're comfortable with that environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned building the team there, and now that you're up to 27 people, which I've seen a lot of growth in the last couple of years since I've worked with you guys. But I mean, this is really Danny's domain, isn't it, Danny? I mean, building that talent strategy,
talent and the culture and that. So, I mean, Marcus, how have you sort of implemented that strategy from as a business? You know, how have you sort of grown that from, you know, being just 1-2 people and then growing it to 27? How have you sort of implemented that strategy?
I mean, it sounds a bit trite, but it's not a complicated strategy. It's simply find the best people you can.
Yes.
It does mean that you have to search really widely. I mean, we have a lot of UK talent, UK educated talent, but we've also had to become sponsors, and we've recruited people from Korea, India, Africa, the US, other parts of Europe. So, you know, that has really been probably the biggest challenge, is just trying to find those people. You know, just to give you an idea of the challenge, there is one person who did a PhD in our field in the whole of the UK in the last 5 years. Luckily, we managed to find him. But that one person, you know, that's the needles that you're looking for in haystacks. So I think to do that, you need to have decent funding, because you need to be able to pay people the good market rate. You need to be able to relocate them in some instances. But you also need a very good HR manager, because they've got to plan, recruit, screen, onboard, develop that whole life cycle. We're very lucky to have a skilled and experienced senior leader who is looking for a role where they can make a real difference. That's been incredibly powerful for us.
Yeah. So, because obviously as the business has evolved and you've transitioned, you know, you did have someone in an office management position kind of picking up on those HR duties. At what point as a business did you think, actually, we need to bring in someone with that, relevance experience from, you know, a large corporation, or just bringing someone in with a solid HR background? At what point did you think you needed that?
I suppose it evolved, because it wasn't at any point that we sort of suddenly said, okay, this is what we need. But I think we went through a kind of evolution. So we recruited somebody who was relatively new in their career, and we decided to train them up and took them through CIP. And that was really successful, and they became very effective. But of course, like all things, they also then became much more attractive to other people, and eventually ended up drifted away. So it worked for a while, and then it didn't work. And so we then had to make a decision as to what we were going to do, and we decided to go for somebody who was extremely experienced, because then we were buying all of that experience and that expertise. And so I wouldn't say it was a decision point. We kind of had it forced upon us, but we tried 2 different strategies. They both worked very well. You can do either or, but now we've got somebody who's really experienced, and we're sort of having the advantage of all of that baked in anyway.
Perfect.
I guess it's that point where a lot of startups, they will have this all-encompassing office manager who's
without a doubt
usually a superman or a superwoman, and just gets involved with everything. Yeah, but then when the company starts to become, you know, you need to have somebody that's a little bit more narrow and depth in that area, and where a really experienced HR manager needs to come in, then, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can either do it with, you know, I've seen different models where you have somebody who comes in a part-time basis, a kind of HR, maybe a couple of a week, and I think that works for some people. You know, we went down a particular route because I think it was a lot about fit. So we interviewed somebody, and the fit was just brilliant. So therefore, it seemed like an obvious decision to do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, Marcus, that obviously the person you had in post, you supported with their CIPD qualification. So, I mean, that sort of goes to show the sort of business that, you know, that you are. You're really big on that professional development. So going on from that, what type of culture are you fostering at Superdielectrics?
Well, let me preface it by saying that we don't always get it right. I mean, we know the culture we want to engender, but whether or not we get that right, I don't know. And so I would say it probably boils down to sort of 4 attributes, if you like, that we've identified. And then probably something that encompasses a sort of a bit of all of it. But I think the first thing is being passionate. So having a real clear focus on problem solving and constructive challenge and being really engaged in the work. That's the first thing. I think secondly is being ambitious, that wanting to deliver work of a really high quality, helping others to do the same, and sort of being thoroughly committed to the kind of completion of what we're doing.
Yeah.
The third thing is being careful. So careful in terms of the way that we interact with our colleagues and mindful of colleagues, but also conserving resources. I mean, as a startup, we're always having to do things on a shoestring. And then strong time management and deadlines. I mean, the thing I always quote to people is it costs us about £14,000 a day just to keep the doors open and keep everybody paid and keep everything going on. So, make a decision about wasting a day, you've got to think those are the real costs of doing it. And so that's the third thing. And I think the fourth thing is probably a fairly generic one that everybody has, which is teamwork. But that's often about being clear and having open and honest conversations with other people and setting expectations with your peers. And, what do they call it in netball? The sympathetic pass. When you pass to somebody, you don't just chuck it in their face. You want to pass it to somebody so they can catch it like that. So I think that's really important. And then the thing that surrounds all of that is a kind of shared understanding. So everybody who joins the business, we try and run through the business presentation with them so they understand their part in what they do. And I think that's really important. I've always been a big believer in that. And, I used to try and explain to people when I worked for the software company how what they did fed into what happened in the share price, because that really was what they were. The two things they were concerned about was how much their shares were worth and what they were doing every day. So how could you link those two things? But I think that shared understanding is really important. Like I say, we don't always get it right, but that's what we're aiming for.
But that's honest, that's honesty. And the fact that you're all there, you all share the same values. Everyone knows what the business's mission is and they all live by it. They all, and that goes hand in hand when you're looking to kind of make additions to the business and grow the team, like you say, getting the best of the best. It's all got to align. So perfect.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, I mean, what do you want to discuss next?
I've come my experience with capacitors was just to really understand that they hold a buffer of energy when you really quickly need it and quickly deplete it. And that was when I was putting really heavy sound systems in a car and needed a capacitor because the battery couldn't supply power fast enough. It's really amazing to see how my understanding has changed since understanding Superdielectrics and how they're able to actually hold the densities increased and the charge that they can hold. And the real life issues, for example, in India, abundant solar energy, but not really able to capture that energy and keep it for long term. The issues with the batteries and their lifespan, with the charging and discharging, real need here. So what I really wanted to know was what's next for the company and what are the commercial plans moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit exactly on the big issues there, because when you have solar energy, there's a thing called Sandia National Labs, which is a kind of US government organization, and they've developed a profile for solar panels for a day, which is now used to test most things to do with solar panels. And when you look at that profile, it's a profile for a typical reasonably sunny day, and yet the spike goes like this. It looks like somebody having a massive heart attack. It looks really uncomfortable to look at, because you can see that it's very erratic, and it's sort of it's very difficult to follow. And so in order to store solar energy, you've got to be able to take in that massively fluctuating energy. Everyone knows that solar energy is intermittent, because nighttime, daytime. But what most people don't realize is it fluctuates massively, even when it's a sunny day. So there's these big fluctuations all the time. And that's really why it's that capacitor storage mechanism is really important. So we're able to take that intermittent, fluctuating energy and end up delivering something which is a sort of steady flow of energy. Because everything that we do as humankind is based on fairly flat energy. If I go to plug my mobile phone in, for example, I need to plug it in something which may be able to charge pretty fast, but it needs to be flat. So it's really taking that unreliable solar energy and turning it into reliable flat energy. That is our major thing. And what we've got at the moment is the product that we've got is a hybrid. So it's got a capacitance element to it. So, you know, like you would have in a supercapacitor, and then it's also got a redox element like you would have in a battery. So it's this hybrid. So we had a very, very simple business plan, and we're just kind of going through the stages of that simple business plan. The first thing is that we need to increase energy density because the commercial opportunities exist with the energy density going up. So you've got supercapacitors, which are something like 6 to 11 watt hours per kilogram, small market, $3 billion a year. You then go up to lead acid batteries, 25 to 35 watt hours per kilogram, $50 billion a year. And then you go up to lithium ion batteries, 100 to 120 watt hours per kilogram, $100 billion a year. So you can see that as you increase the energy density, the commercial opportunities come with that. That was the first thing, increase the energy density. Next, we needed to make sure that we got to a commercial product. So in other words, one that would last for a time that made it commercially viable, had an energy retention that was appropriate, had efficiency which was appropriate. So just turning it into a commercial product. And we've now got to a point where we've got our kind of first version of that commercial product. That was the second step. Third step was to build a pre-production prototype and then be able to launch that. So we did that in March of this year. Then the next step is to start having those commercial conversations and get to a point where we can sign a license agreement. That's probably going to come in several stages. So I would imagine the first thing will be some kind of memorandum of understanding or some kind of cooperation agreement where we're going to testing and design and all of that good stuff. And then we'll hopefully get to a license agreement. And we want that then to get us to the point where we're cash flow positive. And then, quite simply, we're going to plow the money back into doing it all over again. So that's the real goal. And if you have heard any of the story about Intel or other companies like that, they just developed an ARM is another one. They developed a product, they got it to a point where they could sell it, then they developed a better product and they licensed that, and then a better product and they licensed that. So that's really the process that we're looking for. And we believe that we've got something which the technology could eventually exceed all that technology in terms of energy density, but it's going to take us a while to get there, and it's going to take millions more pounds of research and development. So that's really the process that we go along, start that commercial stuff, get the first commercial agreement, and use that to make enough money to keep going with the R&D and improve it.
Amazing.
That's really cool.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. It's been great fun talking to you guys, and really appreciate you giving us the chance to kind of say a little bit about Superdielectrics, and thank you to the One Group, because you know you've been big, important partners for us in terms of what we've done so far to get the people in. And thanks for having me on.
No, it's been great having you. I mean, I know when I first met you guys a couple of years ago, nobody had really heard of you. I certainly hadn't, but now, you know, you're out there. People know who you are, and it's fantastic to see that journey and actually be part of that journey. So yeah, thank you very, very much for joining us today, Marcus. We really appreciate it.
Oh, brilliant. Awesome. Well, thank you all of you today for today's session. Marcus, it's been really insightful hearing about your guys' journey. This is part 2 to our mini startup series. So if you've missed part 1, head over to our YouTube channel and you'll be able to view it there. But if not, we'll keep on going and we'll see you on the next one. So goodbye for now, everyone.